Welcome everyone to the second of our two-part school-based services policy learning forum, a peer learning space for mental health leaders across the country. My name is Yasmina Luxinger, and I am the school-based services transformation team lead for the National Training and Technical Assistance Center for Child, Youth, and Family Mental Health. Welcome in. As you're getting settled in, oh, Leora, thank you for getting us started. We invite you to share your name, your role, and one thing you love about fall, because I live in the desert and we don't have fall seasons here. Oh, Dana likes sweaters around the fire pit. I'm getting jealous already. It's 100 degrees here. Thank you for getting us started and keep them coming. I'm going to go ahead and move us forward so we can get to the exciting part of the dialogue. As always, all the views and opinions expressed today are of the panelists and the panelists alone, but this project was funded by a cooperative agreement with the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Association of America. If you're new to Zoom or if you need a refresher because it's been a very long pandemic, this is a Zoom meeting, not a Zoom webinar. So you may submit your questions in the chat box, but you can also use the reactions features down at the bottom if you'd like to practice now. If you love something one of the panelists say, you agree, disagree, you can throw up oh, we've got some celebrations going on. One of my, Leora sent me some donuts yesterday. There was a rainbow in the sky, any of it, you can use it all. You can use the chat to talk. And we would ask that while the panelists are speaking, that you remain muted with your videos on or off. It's your preference, just to minimize background noise. Go ahead. So who are NTAC? We are a diverse group of multidisciplinary professionals who serve the mental health and wellness of child, youth, and family serving professionals workforce. We have pediatricians, clinical team experts, family advocacy organizations, Youth Move National, equity advisors, and we also specialize in early childhood. But that's not exactly why you're here today. You're here today to talk about policy, so welcome. We're glad to have you here. Take a moment to just ground here. You may be transitioning from many other meetings. Your mind may be busy, but we're excited to connect with you today about such an important topic and get into the nitty-gritty of how does policy implementation work? What are we doing? How do we take something from paper and put it into practice? You can go ahead and move forward. Twice, actually, because you're already working on that. Look at A+ students. So often in our days, especially during the pandemic, we're rushing from thing to thing. We're rushing from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. We're really overstimulated by technology. So for the next 1 minute, I just want everyone to turn their camera off. You can leave your eyes open or closed and just bring yourself into this moment. Bring yourself into this conversation that isn't happening anywhere else. And consider how long a minute actually is. And how rarely we get to take the time. Okay. Go ahead, Carrie. One of the reasons I like to do that exercise is because when we talk about policy, one of the things that we talked about a lot during our first session, and we'll hear more about today, is that policies are about people. And that's why we're here. We're here to make policy change for the wellness of our communities, school communities, health communities, our neighbors, and our friends. And so I think that when we're having these discussions about such critical issues and being in a place to help is such an honor. And so really orienting ourselves on Tuesday, we really spent time orienting ourselves to the why. We won't have time to do that. So today, just asking that you bring that with you into this conversation about the how and the who. We're going to lay a little bit of foundation with what we talked about on Tuesday and the big aha moments. But most of what we'd like to do today is listen to our peer teachers. We're hoping that today feels more like a conversation in our living rooms between a group of experts. Yes, come to our living rooms between a group of experts across the nation, talking about how we implement policy in our day-to-day. Know that if interrupting or excited hand gesturing makes you uncomfortable, or you're like, they're interrupting each other, we set the norms to ask our panelists to do that. We know that there is dialogue, sometimes disagreement, but the discussion will be rich. So we just invite you to come along with us on that journey, whether you're here now or if you're listening to this recording. And then finally, we'll talk about what comes next, because this is about action. Policy is about something we can do. And so we hope that you leave today feeling empowered, but also feeling held that this work is very difficult. This work is slow, and sometimes this work can be frustrating. And one of the things that stuck with me during Tuesday's session was one of the state leaders from California shared how long change can take. And it reminded me of visiting DC and reading the writing on the wall at the Martin Luther King Monument about the arc of moral justice being very long. And sometimes our work can feel very long, but knowing that what we're putting in will help to make things better for the next generation is sometimes what we hold on to in policy work. So moving forward, today, we're really going to take time to talk about policy to practice. What does it look like at the local level? What does it look like at the state level? And what is the difference between guidance and recommendations? And is that a policy? We're going to talk about the importance of partnerships and how those partnerships help to end parity or increase access to services, and disparity, and increase access to services, and how partnerships between the school system and community can be the key to that success. We're going to talk about progress and hopefully plant seeds for possibilities. Where does our policy need to go to be truly equitable? And maybe we have more ability to impact change than sometimes we feel. I'm hoping that's what you leave with today or tomorrow when you listen to this recording again for inspiration. Moving along. So we're going to do a little recap. We're going to do this again on Thursday. This is what Leora and I like to call our what's abouts. Like, what is this all about? Why are we here? Why is this important? And I'll let you kick it off with the first one so we can keep the same flow. Leora.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Tuesday was incredible. I had to get horizontal after both conversations because I was so overwhelmed by the amazing amount of rich learning. And I just want to note one other thing, that I have my Zoom in side-by-side speaker so that I've got the folks who are speaking and the text in case that helps you digest. Speaking of digestion, our first it's about health. When we talk about why school mental health policy, we're actually inviting us to think about that policies are not just school mental health referral policies. They're not just about policies that connect community health providers to schools. We're actually inviting us to broaden and widen our definition of what a school mental health policy can be, that grief policies, HR policies, hiring policies, retention policies, family leave policy, may I go on, that it is about our collective and holistic health. And so when we use the term school mental health policy, we're actually really narrowing in on the H word, on the health, so that we rehumanize our bodies and our spirits in school institutions and school systems from a holistic space.
And the reason that we need to have that holistic view of wellness is because it's about anti-racism. It's beyond equity, and it's to the active component of anti-racist policies, knowing that historically schools have been the system and the tool of oppression and inequity. Our policies cannot be neutral, and trauma-informed policies are not neutral. And part of our privilege and part of our honor is to help end the systemic injustices that have taken place within our policies. That's part of the joy of this work.
Yeah. I think the third one might be many of your love languages, because I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces in the room. It is also about sustainability. So we can't talk about, it can't be the Leora show, it can't be the Yasmina show or the Dr. Lafitte show, Casey, Angela, Terrell, Laura. This work has been happening before us and goes on way long after us. So policies hold up and institutionalize practices that have beautiful impact. And that's actually part of the conversation of today. Is there are also policies that have held up beautiful impact that need to be revisited. And there are also policies that have been held up that have sustained, as Yasmina just mentioned, deep historic harm. So I want us just to also unpack that sustainability doesn't always mean positive impact. It means that things are in place. So when we're talking about sustainability, we are being explicit about policies that have positive sustained impact.
And sustainability matters because it's about safety. For me, I know it says accountability and safety, but in my former lens as a state leader for safety, mental health is community safety. And I'm hoping to change the conversation from safety as bulletproof glass, backpacks, locks on the doors and fences. And safety is about the way school feels. Safety is about the trusting relationships between kids and adults. And the accountability component of policy is putting our values on paper and being explicit about what we believe and holding ourselves to those standards, even when it's difficult.
Yeah, one of the trauma-informed principles that we all hopefully are holding ourselves to and each other to in our trauma-informed practices, transparency and trustworthiness. And that goes into the fifth it's about making the implicit explicit. So when every single word that we use in a policy holds a message about a belief system, whether we're using trauma-informed, compassionate schools, traumatized, at risk, all of those code language, we're actually asking us to uncode them and be explicit about the direction, because policies hold great data. They are a wealth of data to surface internalized belief systems, externalized in language. And so we want to make the implicit explicit.
And we do that for organizational because it's about organizational self-care. And I like to consider self-care organizational community care, because when we're taking care of, when we start with our own house and clean up our own house, and we're ensuring equitable policies from within, and we're ensuring our staff have access to family leave, and we're ensuring our staff have access to those supports, and we're ensuring, as the adults in the room, looking around and seeing that the other adults in the room reflect the community that we serve and speak the language that we serve. And that's when those community partnerships truly reflect the communities that we serve, and we're caring for our community by caring for each other. Day one was a hit. Day one discoveries is how I like to look at it. Leora, give a recap.
Can we just take a pause moment and go back one and see for folks, as you were listening to those it's abouts, some of you heard them on Tuesday, some of you heard them back in April, some of you are hearing them for the first time. Like, what resonated for you? What were you like, yes, that's what it's about? Or were you like, ooh, it's about, I might want to spend more time with? Curious if you can put in the chat box which it's about made your eyebrows wiggle, made you go like, okay, I know Yasmina's, it's about that you run hard for is accountability and safety. I'm running hard for implicit to explicit because I think it connects to all the others, including anti-racism. Okay, so we got some votes for safety, inclusive of mental health, accountability, implicit to explicit. It's about the way school feels. Yes. Okay, great. So some of you are adding on your other it's abouts. Health and anti-racism, organizational self-care. Nice. Okay. Beautiful. Nice to see where some of this is landing for you. Thank you. Making implicit to explicit, walk the talk, not just talk the talk. That's what we're here for today. Yes. All right, cool. All right, Yasmina, let's talk about Tuesday. In case you are having any FOMO, if you were with us on Tuesday for Foundations and you want to put into the chat some of your takeaways, what you remember from Monday, what you remember from Tuesday, we'd love for you to chime in. We're gonna do some calibration so that when we get into the implementation, there's some catch up. So if you're with us on Tuesday, feel free to add in the chat box what you heard, what a takeaway was for you, and we're going to pile on here too. That's my cue to you, Yasmina. Do you want me to keep going?
I thought you were cute. There we go. Amy, I was waiting for someone to come in the chat box. Thank you, Amy. It's about ruffling feathers. There was some other great dialogue as well that we included and would like to share with you on the next slide. Some of the things that we heard from our panelists, again, talking about how change is happening in these slow incremental steps, and having that big picture view, especially as educators, especially if we're coming from the field of education, knowing that within my lived history currently happening, there's still policies that are harmful. And so knowing that every little action we take has big impact, and taking on the collective responsibility to ensure that our policies prevent and undo harm that have been inflicted by our systems and our schools. And those take two different kinds of approaches when you go to create policy and when you go to undo policy. And in the end, policies being about people are something that came up a lot. But what I really loved and why I included the final quote was from Dr. Peters. And he likes to leave folks with a question. And he was one of Leora's mentor teachers when she first entered education. And he challenged our group to think about what is it that gives you courage to do this work? Because there is a personal, individual level of transformation that has to happen. And that is how we translate that work into the policy work, is by first beginning with connection to our own courage and our own reason why. We had some really, really great dialogue about Tuesday. Linda, yes, I see you writing in the chat box, voices need to be heard, student voices, teacher voices, and community voices. And retired educator in the house, because professional learning is important even when there's not students in front of us, because we can still make change.
All right, so we're going to move into today. We will send out the recordings from Tuesday because it will layer on. And I think that piece that Amy's also offering, that our Tuesday teachers asked of us from the state to county to local, is that this work is deeply complex and that the most powerful type of policy learning is to be sitting in question and in critique and in inquiry if a policy is actually policing a behavior or meeting the deepest need of either those that we serve or those that we're working for, or the larger vision of the justice work that we're all committed to.
So with that, I am really excited to introduce to you our first round of panelists. And as I say your name, you can wave and take off your video. We have Angela Castellanos, Casey Yates, Laura Muse, Dr. Louis Lafitte. Matt unfortunately was unable to be here today, and Terrell Sample. And with that, I'd like to liberate us from this PowerPoint. Yay, no more PowerPoint. Welcome to our living rooms. Let's talk. The first thing, oh wait, one more thing before I liberate you from all things technology is Leora is going to lead us through a poll to get a quick pulse on who's in the room.
Oh,
I almost forgot it. I almost forgot it. So if you all want to go off camera while we do this poll, I'm not going to let the moment pass us by. This is why if you come back for round A or round B, I'm not going to forget.
okay, so this will help folks know who's in the room and help folks, Terrell and Casey and Dr. Lafitte and Angela answer questions. There's a good poll around who are you in the space? And this is the poll that I had in front of me, Carrie. So that's what I was able to do. Okay, so we've got a large amount of folks who are from other school mental health initiatives, and we've got representation from all AWARE cohorts, advancing wellness and resilience in education. And we've got some folks who are intermediate, and a lot of folks who are here to learn. And I'm gonna end the poll and show you who's in the room so you can see where you are. And the other piece that I'm going to do is also drop the Google Doc, Yasmina, that can help you track your learning if you'd like to. And we're going to definitely now stop so that we can get to the real juice, which is why we're here.
You can tell I was very excited by Tuesday's conversation because I'm like, no polls, no learning tools, let's talk. Okay, everyone, welcome back. You can turn your cameras back on. So first, knowing we have folks with a range of policy experience, coming from a range of views, I just would like you to introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, your role, and one word that comes to mind when you hear the word policy, or one way your professional practice has been positively impacted by policy. And I will go ahead and start with Terrell.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me a part of this lovely panel today. My name is Terrell Sample, and I am the project director for Maryland Project Aware. I currently am with the Maryland State Department of Education. I had the pleasure of actually being a part of the last year of the first cohort for Project Aware 1. And that actually was the grant that was given to Maryland for 2014 through 2019. I had, again, the pleasure of being a part of the last year of that to kind of get my feet wet. And to continue this great work, we were afforded the opportunity to have the new Aware grant, which was awarded in September of 2020. I do come from a very non-traditional background. I spent quite a bit of time in corporate America. Then I transitioned into health and family services. And now, of course, transitioning few years prior to coming to State Department of Education into education. So thank you.
So I guess I'm up here. I'm Louis Lafitte. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Behavioral Health and School Safety in the Glendale Elementary School District, which is in Arizona. For me, I support our department, which most people call it Student Services, but we've kind of reimagined it, and it's our Behavioral Health and School Safety Department. So our major responsibilities are to support not just parent concerns and requests, but well-being of all of our students, staff, and family. So thank you.
I'll hop in next. My name is Casey Yates, he, him. I'm the Director of Intervention for Warren County Public Schools here in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I'm our Project Aware Director as well. And one word when it comes to policy that I immediately think of is work. Policy change is work. It's a grind, and it's a day in, day out. So it's good to be here. Good to see you all. Recognize some names. Looking forward to the conversation, and we'll talk.
Hi, I'm Angela Castellanos, and I'm a training specialist for NTAC. I have a lot of experience as a direct practitioner, as a school social worker, then moved up to coordinator in different school districts. And I think one piece how I connect to policy is the 6-year-old Angela. So I'm going to tell you a quick story. I immigrated to the United States when I was 6 years old, and I was placed in a school I mean, I was accelerated in El Salvador, and I was placed in the school for about a week. Then I got moved to a different school, all English speaking. They put me in the corner with a computer and a book. And they asked my mom, should we test her for special ed? My mom's like, no, she's super smart. Like, that's not going to work. So at that point, I said, you know what? I am going to learn English. And I dedicated my time to working really hard as a 6-year-old to learn English. And the teachers were like, what happened here? And I said, since that day, I said, no one's going to put Angela in the corner or another child. So that's really helped me to connect to the advocacy and the policy and work that I do. That's just kind of where I connect my initial advocacy work as a social worker. So thank you. I'm so excited about the conversation here today.
Thank you. And Laura, I apologize for leaving you off my first list.
Oh, you're okay. I am Laura Muse, and I am a North Carolina project director. We actually co-direct in North Carolina. I am on the Department of Mental Health side, and I co-do it with Heidi Austin, who is on the public instruction side. So it's really nice. That's a strong partnership that we have here in North Carolina. We are part of the 2018 cohort, but have recently applied for a new cohort, and we're just waiting for SAMHSA to let us know. So when I think of policy, I just think of, I guess the first word is complicated. Because there's a lot of work that goes into it. I think sometimes not the right people are at the table, and it's just a complicated thing in general. And so that's kind of the word that I think of when I think of policy. And I am on my cell phone because it's thunderstorming here. So I was worried the internet was going to go out. So if you see dogs or chaos, I'm doing my best to be present with you guys. Thank you for having me.
I feel like I'm doing my best to be present is the 2021 motto, so you don't need to apologize. And if you suddenly drop off, we will welcome you back gladly. Moving on to our first question, we talked about, and again, I want to say we're so lucky to have such a diverse group of experts from the state to the local level who have lived experience and bring so much passion to the field. We know from our conversations on Tuesday that it can be one thing to write a good policy or legislation, but implementing good and equitable policies and taking that paper to practice are something that can be even harder and take a really group effort. So in your experience, what are 1 to 2 factors that help move something on paper into actual practice? And Angela, I'm gonna start with you so you can talk about your work with the suicide prevention policy and some of the task force work you've done.
Yeah, so I was formerly, I feel like I'm in recovery. I was formerly a coordinator of mental health for a medium-sized school district in Orange County, California. And one of the pieces that really connected such a strong collaboration was the creation of a task force. So back in 2016, for those that don't know, the Assembly Bill 2246 was enacted, which is the suicide prevention policy in California, where all the schools in the state of California had to have a prevention, intervention, and postvention policy in schools. And back then was just at middle school and high school. I kind of knew that this was coming down the pike just based on my work with the process. So at that time, I said to my boss, okay, this is coming down the pike. What do you want to do? So he turned the question back to me and said, what do you want to do? And I said, I'm glad you asked. So I had a plan in place already. And I think the first thing, and somebody put it in the chat as well, and I heard this resonate a lot on Tuesday, was really making that voice loud enough, the voices of the stakeholders. So we created a suicide prevention task force that encompassed, students, teachers, parents. We had board members, community providers. This is a pretty large group. And we were able to, we have the template, which is the what. We had the board policy in place already. Or at least the template, right? A rough draft. But we needed to kind of figure out the administrative regulations, which is the how. How is this going to happen? What resource do we have in place? Students, vetted out all the different programs that we were going to be using for prevention work. There's a lot of other committees that were created, but I think one of the pieces that really stood out to us is getting that voice to be heard, but also looking at the data and what does that mean to us? What does this information mean to us? Is really having that connection. And we were able to get this process done in about 9 months. We were ready to go for board approval before September, because we had to have the policy by by July 1st of the next following school year. So because we know sometimes for me as a practitioner, I want things done quick, let's get this going. But sometimes we're gonna have to go slow to go fast, right? So that's the piece that just like it was kind of not frustrating in a sense, but definitely having a lot of patience to include this process and these conversations moving and going forward.
So Angela, you're really echoing something that was brought up a lot on Tuesday, which is including the voice of the folks who we serve, and also understanding that when you're implementing something complicated or that may have stigma, that it can take a long time. Has anyone else had similar experience? Casey, I know you had some experience in preparing policy for implementation as well. I'm going to invite you to share.
Sure, yeah, and feel free to hop in, anyone with questions, and kind of ask for examples. I don't really know how brief to keep this, but a couple of factors, that we've that found that are critical to success are one of support. Now, I found that we and my team have an amazing team. We've had a lot of success with policy implementation, but sometimes it's easier to get it on paper than it is in the practice. And for us, we found that just heavy support, that's training, coaching, consulting, working hand in hand, being willing to do the work with the teams in the district, with and alongside them, was a critical piece to our success. The train and hope doesn't really work. So some of the training, there's a lot of training, and there's a lot of resources that get thrown at people that go along with policy. It overwhelms our already overworked educational staff, our district leaders, our local leaders, our teams in the schools. So we really, one thing I ask my team to do is we really vet a resource and we really spend time with support. So if we're going to give them a resource to go with the policy to get it in place to make it impactful, if there's any resources we're going to sprout, we're going to understand it, we're going to know it, we're going to be familiar with it, we're going to give it to them, and we're going to not just let it rain on them, and we're not just going to train a bunch of people. So in order for us to really move things into practice, we just provided copious amounts of support, and we continue to do so. And I have an excellent team. I'm sort of in the fortunate position to be able to pick a lot of my team. So that's been great. But those two pieces right there have allowed us to really, or that piece has allowed us to really experience some success with our policy. And the second is, really making an effort to align whatever policy it is we're working with, to make sure we align it with our district and local mission, vision, goals, so that people see the connection. Where are we going? What is this policy for? Who does it benefit? How does this improve student outcomes? We can't be seen as new. We can't be seen as extra, and it can't be seen as disconnected. So we really make sure that we take time to support the process, support the team, support the people. That's both our administrators, that's principals, that's their building leaders, their leadership team, that's our other district level leaders. We make sure we connect it back to our district vision, mission, and our goals. And we really just support that process and kind of let people see where we're going and why we're going, as opposed to being handing them a piece of paper and saying, hey, this is a new policy, let's get cracking. It's that doesn't work.
I think that you bring up some really good points from the difference in lens between a state implementation of policy and a district implementation of policy. And one thing that I would hear in speaking with district leaders is there was a confusion over what policy was, but I think COVID-19 really taught us about how the need to implement policy fast and how it's always changing and how that impacts the district level And Dr. Lafitte, I know that you're joining us as a district leader as well. Did you find that the policies that you were required to help implement during COVID-19, what strategies did you use to help make that successful throughout your district?
So I kind of cut off, but I heard you call me, right? So for us, the strategies we use, because we had to move so quickly and there was a lot of fluidity with we really wanted to rely on a lot of the data behind us, because we knew we had to ensure people had a level of trust in whatever we did. So for us, we tried to look at the bigger picture of, as we put these things out, staff needs to have a level of trust, families need to have a level of trust. How do we communicate it? How do we put it in place? So by having a level of consistency, by looking at data, by using that to support every decision we made. And we have a phenomenal superintendent who, what she did really was did a lot of background work with the board, made sure they understood what was going on, kind of talked them through, coached them through the entire process, provided data to them to ensure that they could make informed decisions. And the one thing for me that I think was important was she has a lot of trust. Her board has a lot of trust in her. And so she was able to kind of move things to the board where she was given a lot of autonomy to be able to make those decisions on the fly as needed. But she was also, again, still in that communication phase with the board, with communities. We sent out communication, it seemed like daily, seemed like by the minute, on things that were going on. But the one thing COVID did show, as you mentioned, is flexible. We have to be responsive. We have to be quick. We have to look at the needs of our constituency group, because as everyone's aware, every district has had different hurdles for different reasons. But even when you look at masks, right? A district says wear a mask, another one says no. You get parents on both ends of the aisle who say, I don't like that. And so it's just using all of the resources, data behind it, what organizations and partners we have in place as well.
I think that sets us up perfectly. And I like something that you said. I think it really connects with the foundations of what we spoke to on Tuesday, was that the meaningful action happens in partnership and in relationship. And so Terrell, I'm gonna pass this next question to you, because when we talk about the policies, procedures, programs, and practices that we implement, I know you have a history of community organizing and partnership, and can you talk to us about what that looked like and how you generated action together?
Absolutely. And one of the things that has actually been the greatest parts of being a part of both segments of Aware 1 and Aware 2 is that with Aware 1, there was the Maryland Safe to Learn Act that was implemented towards the end in 2018, which again is when I was a part of the policies and just trying to see how we could augment our current practices and just to kind of make that work to fit. So that involved a lot of partnerships. The majority of our partnerships that we actually have in Maryland are through our ties with the University of Maryland and also through the National Center for School Mental Health. Each of those entities has been very, very instrumental with helping us to find training opportunities. We've also partnered with the Mental Health Association of Maryland that does the majority of our trainings for youth mental health first aid trainings. In the new grant for 2020, we have partnered with the Family Tree of Baltimore. They have been very, very phenomenal with delivering content for ACE Interface, which is adverse childhood experiences, but they take it from a different lens, which helps us to understand the why behind the what, looking at the neuroplasticity of what triggers the brain, what makes things work, what makes things not work, and how we respond, not only as educators, but also as family members and community members. All of these various partnerships and pieces actually work together because, as we know, mental health is very complex. And certainly in order for us to be successful in any policies that we actually try to orchestrate or demonstrate, it has to be of a holistic approach. When we actually look at this whole spectrum holistically, this takes me into another point that has actually transpired that I'm extremely proud of, because I was a part of that from the start to the finish, is during the 2020 legislative session for Maryland, we actually had a state delegate that really was so passionate about mental health and what trauma informed actually meant. There was actually House Bill 277 that actually came into play, and that actually brought about what does trauma informed look like and how does it impact our school system. And what we found through this particular legislation and actually looking to see what the requirements were, they were very vague. It basically just said that you just need to have a guidance document, is actually what it's called. It's actually not really a policy, but a guidance document, which we know can lead to policies and make change as we go through to our school systems. And in Maryland, we have 24 districts that we do serve. And with that particular guidance document, we were tasked to partner with the Behavioral Health Administration within Maryland. Some of the local schools and universities also have representation from the governor's council that talks about handle with care. Also with the substance abuse leadership for Maryland. So it was a whole gamut of people in which we were tasked to involve. But what came out of that was a guidance document. And that particular guidance document has just been rolled out to our school systems. And how timely is that when we are trying to transition back successfully for COVID? And the document is called the Trauma-Informed Approach. And from that guidance document is basically a framework to actually help systems to navigate holistically to educate all teachers, staff, but it also goes further to be inclusive of families and communities. So thus, that is what helps to make our partnerships viable and stronger as we go through. Another component that I would like to lift up briefly as we do, of course, move along in the conversation is one of the other pieces that helps our AWARE initiative that, again, coincides with policy is we have a unique factor that we have family navigators is actually the titles in which we call our other pieces from, we have, of course, the coordinator that coordinates all types of projects and programs that various districts do. And it's based on their need. We're not dictating to say you have to do X, Y, Z, because we know we're not one size fits all. Everybody.
That's really important. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because just as we're individuals, we're unique. So therefore districts are unique. The geographics are unique. And also looking at the resources are unique. So we have these family navigators that actually go into homes, they make phone calls, they help to coordinate to make sure our students and families have all resources, or to the best of their ability, what resources they can connect students and families with for mental health and well-being. But it's not just about the students, because think about it. The majority of the time, our students are with their families. So whatever transpires in that home is going to spill over to what makes you have a successful day at school, what makes you have an unsuccessful day at school. And we want to be inclusive with family engagement. And these are the best ways that we can establish that rapport and continue to build relationships that are sustainable. So it's simplistic in the fact that it's just about relationships, conversations that we're having like today. So being that of a courageous conversationalist or being that particular advocate to say, I care about you. So this is how I show that I care about you, because I'm going to do all I can to link you to what's going to provide you with a positive outcome instead of the stigma that goes along with all of these things that we're speaking on today.
That was an extremely rich answer. And that was a lot. I'm going to process it out loud for a little bit while other folks think about it and maybe want to add. But one of the things I wanted to highlight, first of all, is you started with educating the decision makers. That I think is really important, especially as we consider the future of mental health policy, school mental health policy. In most states, there is health policy and there's education policy. And those policies are housed in different parts of the law. So when policymakers are going to write the law, they're usually an education policy writer or a healthcare policy writer. And so sometimes when you get a piece of policy that's trying to bridge those two worlds, they might not use the language correctly. So what I really like what you said there, but before anything else, is you started with just educating the people who are the gatekeepers in what does this actually mean and how does this help me meet other goals. You know, it's kind of deciding like which lever you need to move for action to take place. Did anyone else have anything to add? I know that you all are good at partnerships, but any other things that you've seen successfully generate action on those policies that have been enacted?
I think for me, I enjoyed listening to your responses, and I was writing like different words that just came to mind. The courageous conversationalist. I love that, right? So one thing that stands out for me is those relationships are so important. And the other, I'm a storyteller. I like to tell stories. But when I was hired as a counselor on special assignment at one of the LA school districts, it was during AB 1802, Assembly Bill 1802, where kind of like the State Department provided a lot of financial resources to school districts to reduce the counselor to student ratio. They said you need to develop this tier system of support. And the first thing that I did is having that courageous conversations with people is like, what do you need? Like, what is it that you need? So I developed like different focus groups with teachers, with the parents. How do you access mental health? Like, tell me about how you connect to resources. Do you go to your neighbor? And that's how we were able to develop this fabulous referral system. Because at that time, the teachers were really frustrated that parents were not coming to school. Parents were not coming to school or engaging with the school. So we had conversations about this is how they want to be engaging in school. So it's a whole different experience culturally for the teacher. So I just kind of want to resonate that the words that you said, courageous conversations, create such a magic with relationships, right? Just making those connections.
I really like the resonance of, if we can remember anything to move forward, is that the work happens in relationship and the work happens because of courageous conversations. But if you had to look at a bright and shiny new someone who wants to change the world through policy, and they're just beginning, and you had to say, here's a piece of, and we're going to start with state leadership. So we'll start with our folks who are at our state leadership, and then district leadership. So you're just starting out in state leadership. Laura, Terrell, Angela, I believe you did some state leadership as well. Yes. What would you say to someone who's just beginning that experience about policy implementation?
I think for me, there was one boss, and I think I already talked about this, that said, you must go slow to go fast. And I think there's so many different, and I can't remember who actually mentions this, that there's so many different resources and emails and initiatives that are coming down the pike, right? is that I learned not to try to get confused or just trying to do everything all at once. I think that would be like my recommendation, is to kind of take things piece by piece. That would be like my, my recommendation for somebody who's starting.
And I would just add on to that to say that there's really not a need typically to reinvent the wheel. Oftentimes, if you start doing some homework or you start talking to some of your partners and stuff, there is some form of language or understanding already existing that you can just build upon. And that, I was going to say, even on the previous answer, sometimes just being willing to share and or ask someone to share helps enormously with getting momentum. Sometimes it feels too big of a project when there's a blank piece of paper or whatever. But sometimes when you have the resources or tools to kind of look at others, that helps a momentum and almost a feeling of success just right there.
So Laura, when you say share, you mean share examples of successful products, or share in the labor, or share in the co-creation of what works?
I would say all of the above. And there used to be a frame I can't remember, but it's like almost like share shamelessly, because it comes back to you. And when you're willing to kind of share your resources, I feel like along the way, that kind of energy will come back. So I would just say all of the above to that.
Does anyone have an example of how that share steal shamelessly, share seamlessly philosophy has played out in their policy implementation? Any stories of success, or maybe a time that didn't work?
I would say for myself, I try to seize those what I call reachable, teachable moments. And as to Laura's point, when you're actually trying to kind of like share and kind of like take a little of this and take a little of that, you find that people already have, or organizations have, the tools already in place, but it's just how do we execute those things? And when we start to look at it from maybe a wholly different perspective of being that of a growth mindset, I'll just say, when you have a growth mindset, you actually are able to shift to that proactive stance versus the traditional, and I'm using that word loosely, traditional reactive stance. Because a lot of times we find, especially in this particular subject matter, that we're finding that people and organizations are so stuck or fixated on traditionalism that we've done it this way. But if the pandemic has taught us nothing more, we have to just be innovative with everything that we do, because it's all about trial and error on a lot of things. So as we're sharing and taking each component, you'd be surprised as to what you can do that makes that actual difference when you just take the time to actually know whom you're serving and accept who you're serving. So knowing and then learning to accept, that helps us to adapt and to adopt a new way of doing things, thus creating new policy or augmenting what's currently in place.
And I'll speak with my former state leader hat on for a minute before I pass it to our district leaders. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone entering state leadership that has a role in overseeing any type of state program or grant program, is to read the piece of legislation that governs that particular piece of your program. Because one thing that I found, in my former unit had funders from every federal entity and state funding streams, is oftentimes it had been so long since some of the folks had read what some of the legislation said that we were actually able to amend some things, because we hadn't as a group revisited it in so long. So just knowing that what is written into law or regulation, those are the formal types of policy that come down from legislatures or state boards, that everything that is written, that's exactly how it should be, which sometimes can be a blessing and sometimes can be a curse. So I will pass it to our district leaders to talk about, if someone is new and just starting in district leadership, what is one piece of advice that you would give them as they begin this work? I'll start with you, Dr. Lafitte.
So for me, I think the key thing for me at the beginning to build understanding. And so for me, the approach is, and I take my educator hat. So as a teacher for some years and principal and all that, for me is to really try to deconstruct exactly what is the policy asking, to really break it apart and understand it. Or if we're building a policy, you know that saying, begin with the end in mind, know what our end goal is so that we know what we're constructing. So it's to build a level of understanding and then to identify what's needed to make it work and really go through all of those steps. Who are the experts within our building, outside of our building, other policymakers, other leaders, others who are involved in those areas. And then what are the resources needed and how do we connect all of those pieces? So you asked for examples. So in this case, for me, and Yasmina was a part of AWARE with us here in Arizona. And so she might have some awareness. And I see Rebecca on here. She helped with this. But Arizona last year, a couple years ago, state legislature passed a statute 15120 that requires all staff members. You have to get trained in awareness and prevention for guidance counselors, teachers, administrators, any personnel who works with students grades 6 through 12. So for us, we knew we had this window of time. We have to get all these staff members trained. Fortunately, we're K-8, so by statute, we only had to get a small number trained. But because of the partnerships, because of the resources, Project Aware, they were able to provide. I had gotten trained on suicide prevention, mental health, all of our social emotional learning specialists. As a district, every one of our school sites has a social emotional learning specialist. We got all of them trained in suicide prevention. And then we even got some vouchers to pay for online training, especially as COVID hit. It was all of these people trained when we can't even be in the same room with each other, right? Because of the different policies that were enacted. And so for us, we got these online opportunities. And so we ended up training every single staff member. And our district, we have about 1,400 staff members. That includes custodians, bus drivers, teachers, you name it, they got trained. And it was just connecting all of those pieces on what is the policy, what is resources, how do we leverage that, how do we enact it? And it's just going through those steps. If you plan it, if you think it through, if you put through those steps and processes, it'll be easy, but you have to think about it ahead of time. You can't just say, I'm going to fall into it. You have to really think it through. So deconstruct it and understand it.
I think that especially as we hear the dreaded unfunded mandates that often come our way as educators, is really understanding what is required of us can save a lot of panic. Does anyone else, Casey, what in your experience, what advice would you give someone who is just starting in their work at district leadership in this policy work? How would you help them get started?
One thing I would definitely suggest, if you're at a district level and maybe even at state, I don't know, but to really just, when you're in the district, take a lot of time to learn and understand all the systems and structures and policies that are already in existence. So, how things work at the district level, at the local school level, because if you're going to attempt to implement a policy, it helps to know where the pieces fit and what already exists that you can build onto and into, kind of like what Dr. Lee was saying. It's just, you're going to take and work with what you got, and it works a lot more efficiently if you understand where you are, if you understand what policies are already in place that you compare and work with, how all the systems and structures within the districts are built, and they're different. You know, we're a pretty good sized district. A lot of our schools operate autonomously, so it's it's important to kind of get a good understanding. Second, find your champions, whatever your policy is. There's going to be people in the district who are more influential than others. So you're really going to have to find people who champion whatever policy it is that you're wanting to push out or implement. And I'll give you some examples that we've done shortly. Build relationships. A lot of times, and don't throw stones, Terrell, there's a lot of times there's a disconnect from state and local policy. So, policies that come out at the state level come down to the district level. Sometimes there's not a real strong understanding of, let's say, how different districts operate, and those policies are not necessarily implemented well, but they're implemented, right? If you're told to do it, you do it, but it's not necessarily great. There's a lot of fidelity issues there, and I'm not going to give you any examples because I don't want to get us in any trouble, but they do exist. And, we have these conversations, all of the districts have these conversations between themselves, and, there's just some that don't get it done well. But, and second, I want to talk about connecting everything to outcomes. So if we're student focused, student centered, we exist to serve students, family, and our communities. That's the point, right? That's our job. So connecting everything you can to student outcomes, that's, mental health, behavioral health, academic, is an important piece of that work. So if you're just starting out and you're having the conversations with, let's say, principals or other district directors or your superintendent, CEO, CFO, you'll really gain a lot of ground if you actually connect it to outcomes, because otherwise you just have something extra without really how it connects, or how is this going to benefit us? How is this going to benefit our district? How is this going to benefit our students? So that said, those are some pieces that I would give. Now, example, I'm going to tell you kind of how I craftedly worked within a system and structure. We wanted all of our administrators and all of our teachers trauma trained, right? However, not everyone wants to take time out of their days and out of their school years to do the training, to participate, and things that are mandated aren't often well received. So there are a couple of things that we did to make sure that it would work, it would feel well, it would feel natural. Every year we have an admin week where there's a series of trainings that are built out for all the district level administrators. So, I met with our CIO and I was like, what would be really nice if all our administrators were trauma trained, and I just happen to have one of the nation's best on speed dial, and we'd love to get them in there and kind of work with those staff, put them in front of our trainer and just have these conversations. So we actually managed to work that in. So it wasn't anything extra for them, but it was a regular part of our annual training week, right? So now it's kind of built in. Second, we've got a lot of teachers in our district, thousands. So how do we get our teachers trauma trained, right? So we took a strong campaign, and we really just went out there and we beat the bushes, and we got everybody in we could, and we recruited them. But to second that up, we're looking at when we talk about systems and structures, we have a new teacher certified employee academy. Every year there's an annual series of trainings that are what are important to Warren County Public Schools. These are important. These are the things that we want everybody to know, be familiar with. It's sort of our onboarding program. So again, I met with all of our district leaders. It's like, what would be great is if all of our new certified employees were trauma trained. It's already an existing structure. They're already going to be there. How can we make sure that every new employee that comes in the district is trauma trained? So so now that's an annual part, and that's a new development. I've been working on that one for months, because it was already an established structure. These are important. We don't want to ask more of their time. It's like, how about, offer some alternatives, how we combine it, to make it fit. So we got it to make it fit. So, and it's part of our new policy and procedure is that now all new certified employees, and that gets all our administrators too. So anybody new coming in the district as a certified employee will be trauma trained. So just those are some ways to really just work within the structures that you're given. To try to do that on top of everything you've already got, or to not build it into a system or exist, you get a lot of pushback, because I got some negative examples too, but those are some that worked well for us. So that would be my advice to anyone in district level leadership, just those few things to really, if you want a measure of success, to kind of pursue.
And I think you also offhandedly brought up an important point, that of the amount of attempts it takes for something successful to happen, how many times does something, like what percentage do you think of attempts do you think end the way that you envision them?
So I'm a relationships person, and I focused on that first. I'm going to throw that out there because I built relationships with the people who make those decisions quickly. And I'm going to use that and say that is probably the most critical strategy, is that your ability to form a relationship with the people you need in your boat to make policy implementation successful. That's critical. So now when we talk about percentage of failure, when I was new, I would just throw it out there. Hey, we're all going to do this. This is a policy. This is what we're doing. And it never really worked all that well. And we do an annual survey. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a Studer survey, but it's a survey where they, everyone gets a chance to have a voice in the district. I will give you an example. All right. So we wanted to do a Kutcher adolescent depression scale. And we wanted all of our secondary students to take it. All right. We've worked with the developers. We have a good relationship with a coalition that promotes this. And so, yeah, I just did it. Like, I put a date on it. I attached it to an agenda. It went out. It resulted in boatloads of work for a lot of other people. And it did not go well. And the feedback, like, it went great for the students, right? Like, we were able to serve and help a lot of students. We were able to flag a lot of students that needed immediate intervention. And just a lot of good came from it. But it really took a little while to recover from it because of the way it was handled. So it didn't go nearly as well. But I didn't give up. We did it again, but this time we brought all of our counselors in, our mental health team, our licensed professionals, our director of student services, and we developed a schedule of administration. I gave everyone a script. We talked about it. We bounced it back and forth. And so the next time we were able to almost flawlessly push it out. A lot of success from that as well. But that's just of learning from failures. So that's going to happen. But it was good. So that percentage wise, I don't know. It depends on how you handle things,
I think that you bring up a really good point that we talked a lot about on Monday. Sometimes your no's can be as informative as your yeses, right? And that those teach you how to refine and do things in a different way. And I really just want to uplift what was shared in the chat from Cynthia about inviting the policymakers and the gatekeepers and the people in your boat, thinking about who all the different people you might need in your boat. Casey, you talked about to make that change, to move the levers of change. And just want to uplift that that's a really good idea, to just invite your policymakers, gatekeepers to observe your classroom, see what it's like. The policymakers first are excited to do that when they're invited, and that's not advocacy. They're policymakers. They should be seeing how, what schools look like. Does anyone else have any other examples or something they'd like to share?
I completely agree with what you're saying as far as like it's Cynthia, and then what you mentioned about inviting, and Casey also, the policymakers. And I remember when we were implementing the suicide prevention policy, my colleague and I had a really great idea of inviting the actual author of the assembly bill. He lives in Long Beach. I said I invited him to, coffee. We had some connections as far as like, common people that we knew. And we just had a really nice conversation about like, what was the reasoning behind, we knew what suicide prevention policy, but what was his reasoning? Why did he co-author it? Did he think about funding for schools when they were developing this policy? And so I don't know if that made a big change, but it really helped me to think about how do I address some of these no's that I'm gonna, confront, right? Because there were a lot of no's when we first started implementing the policy, with individuals like, didn't want to do this new training. We're making the training pretty easy, and we used an evidence-based module that we did online, but it was just really nice to see that, having that conversation about what was the rationale behind it. Can you, attach some funding to some of these initiatives that are coming down from the state, because schools really need it, but they also need that funding behind it. So just want to echo that.
Yes, and also Angela and Casey, thank you again for bringing those points up. But one of the other things that comes to mind as far as inviting policymakers or people that have actually been very instrumental in having policy change, we in Maryland, there's the law called Lorenz Law, which actually is about suicide prevention. And the mother of the student whose daughter actually died by suicide, she has been very, very proactive and an advocate for that. And she goes to various schools around the state. And I've had the pleasure within this last year of partnering with her to be one of our facilitators to deliver question, persuade, and refer training to all of our grantees, or just to anyone within the state, even outside the AWARE grant, that wants to actually become instructors or gatekeeper trainings. So that was very, very powerful for me personally, but has made a tremendous impact on all that we serve throughout our districts as well. So thank you guys for bringing that up. But that example came to mind, and it's been a phenomenal partnership that we're growing and growing as we continue.
I want to be mindful of our time, and there's a question that I really want to serve to this group that is not the next question. It's about COVID-19 and policy. It is one of the last questions. COVID-19 brought to light the pre-existing health and education inequities in our nation. And I think we're kind of getting there with the way we're talking about the need to build relationships, but policy implementation, like we have this new policy, we have to do it right now. It can be hard to prioritize, and knowing everything that has gone on in this country, that has happened in this country, that has happened in our classrooms, how can we convince people that this is important when there's so many conflicting priorities? And how would you motivate them to take on something like policy and policy implementation when there's a pandemic happening? I see you nodding, Dr. Lafitte. So I'm going to give everyone a minute to process, because that's a big one, and I knew there would be some good dialogue around that.
I think one of the pieces that I saw, because I transitioned from administrator to this position during the pandemic. So I got a glimpse of the initial pieces as far as like transition and how to quickly, like Dr. Lafitte was mentioning, you had to adapt. So I was overseeing all of the family navigators, the liaisons, the school social workers and counselors. And so one of the pieces that we really sat down and thought about was, Laura mentioned this earlier, is that innovative piece. So I'll just talk a little bit about just the direct practice or direct work with the students. So I think one of the positives that the gold nugget that came out of COVID-19 and policy implementation is we were always struggling with this whole HIPAA, FERPA, and access and consent and all of these different pieces. And we saw like a pretty quick mobilization from the different organizations like the National Association of School Psychologists, counselors, and social workers really have a connection because the outcome was really, we needed to serve as the students, right? How do we get access to these kids so quickly, right? So that was a gold nugget that I saw in that transition piece. I don't know if that answers that question, but
I think that's beautiful, Angela, because I know that in light of COVID-19, we were able to do some amazing things through policy as well that had been stalled for years in terms of mental health policy. So feel free to continue to expand on that and how we can leverage the momentum that's happening through policy to help our students moving forward.
Well, just quickly, an example was we were able to develop the parameters as far as like confidentiality, accessing the students through, telehealth, having like a plan in place. Like we developed that in a couple of weeks to make sure that we were the continuity of care for students was essential. And then also how to work with the navigators to access those students that we were not able to reach out to, and leveraging our partnerships who were able to have that access to the families as well. So it was like a really nice team effort to develop that quick process to be able to access students and continue to provide that support that they were getting and continue. And then, develop, everything just got aligned so nicely with counselors were able to get very creative with technology and all of those pieces as well.
I would say for Maryland, part of the extension of the trauma-informed guidelines that I shared earlier, and also that coupled with how we actually have modeled our Project Aware initiative, we actually do regional centered trainings about mental health and supports. And from some of the CARES Act money that has, of course, been funneled and shared throughout all of the states, what we have elected to do, and our officials at the State Department of Education, is to actually put together a mental health supports initiative that's actually going to be a regionalized model, which again goes back to sustainability and providing all of those supports regionally for all of our districts, not just the ones that are listed in the Project Aware grant. But again, we've actually taken those particular policies and the models and protocols that were already set in place through Aware to actually extend that so that we can build capacity throughout the state for any facet regarding mental health. So all of these practices have actually helped change the legislation, which again was actually a part of or during the pandemic. So very timely that all of these components are coming to the forefront and putting mental health as the key focus.
I like that, capitalizing on the momentum of something that was overall awful. We can all agree on that, on the pandemic, but taking it forward to impact the sustainability, because it's about sustainability.
Yes.
And I like to end on that, because I'm going to ask you all now, we're going to go around real quick and do a rapid round of one thing you want the folks listening to this recording or to the folks here with us today to walk away with. And if you're listening to us live, I want you to populate in the chat one thing you're going to walk away with. I'm going to pass it to Laura, then Dr. Lafitte, then Casey, then Angela, and we'll end on Terrell. One thing you want folks to walk away with today.
That's a big ask. I guess I'm glad I'm going first because I would say relationships, and I'm going to steal Casey's because I know he's a relationship guy too, but I do think that in work and in life, things happen through relationships. And I think that is probably your strongest starting point with anything that you're trying to accomplish.
What Laura said. Now, do I want to add to it? I think relationships are key. But I also think too, it's to think as you go through these processes of all the different connection points. Don't just localize everything to you. Know that there's more out there, and so think of all the connection points, pros and cons, because then. And I think it opens up your circle, right? And it adds to your network, and it allows you to identify everyone you need. I forgot the word that Casey used earlier, or what is it on your boat? In your boat, the people you need in your boat. We need to. There's a lot of folks out there, and sometimes don't think of it as just a boat. Think of it as a collection of boats, series of boats. A yacht, I don't know, but sometimes there's a lot of folks that you need and to make it work. So that's it for me.
And I'm going to go back to one thing and make sure we all walk away with this. If there's a policy that's being implemented, support. Without the support, the policy won't be implemented. If it is implemented, it won't be implemented well. So, being willing to do the work with your teams and with your people. It is a lot of work, but if you're just there for your expertise and to provide people with the policy, it just won't end well. So, just keep that in mind. If there's a policy that's important to you, your district, your state, and you want that implemented well, then support it. And sometimes that does mean money, but oftentimes it does not. A good example is, we have a lot of money right now with ESSER money, but human resources and capital is limited. So more money doesn't necessarily mean more human capital or resources, especially if you don't have the people or can't hire the people to do the work. So I'll leave you with that. Support.
Well, a lot of them were taken, but I'm going to stick to this one. It's having those, going back to what Dr. Lafitte mentioned was, and also Laura, support, like consult with other folks. Don't reinvent the wheel. Like there's so many different resources out there. I often there were a lot of no's from me. There were a lot of cries. I would cry and just be frustrated, but I got to the point where I just like, you know what, I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to get the support. And then, just having that, I know you only said one, but courageous conversation is to just networking and having those, that support system is so crucial when you're developing developing a policy. So that's what I would leave you with.
Everything you all just said, but in addition to those things, I would just simply say is to actually be steadfast into what your goal is. Don't forget what your mission is, because all of these things collectively help you to have and to seize that conversation, to initiate the conversation, because all of these things help to rewrite and to actually engage what is going to make you most successful in whatever it is you aspire to do.
And it's 2021 and I'm still accidentally on mute. I love the wisdom that was shared today, and I want to invite Carrie to first drop the link in the chat so that you can tell us what you thought of today. You can agree, argue, aspire, tell us in a survey. I love the things that are coming in the chat box. From Paul, he said someone talked about doing groundwork early on. Appreciate and value that the amount of time it takes to have policy go through from paper to implementation. Leora wrote that she's walking away with the amount of organizing skills to do this work. The relationships, systems, and legislation can seem broken sometimes, but we were just talking about yesterday the human behind the policy, the people behind the policy, and how important it is to nurture and support those relationships. And it's because of relationships that we can have this conversation today. A lot of the folks here today are people that we have developed relationships with in the past and have informed and mentored and provided us inspiration in our work. And so this was us modeling to you all who are watching or listening at home that we don't have all the answers. And that's why we called in the assistance of our community to help answer these questions. Things are changing really fast in light of COVID-19. And as I watch the news, I see that they're changing rapidly by the minute. And so keeping a network and a web of support, of people you can call, how have you done this before? What worked, what didn't work? And don't be afraid to fail. I hope you all leave today with the courage to fail epically and with fanfare, because that means that you know one thing that doesn't work, and then that's one less thing to try. Any final thoughts as Carrie prepares the event? Oh, she got the evaluation link in there, I think. Oh, yes, there it is. Any other final thoughts before I adhere to my trauma-informed values and give you all 5 minutes of time to transition to your next event in this day?
The only other thing that I would share collectively is that we are all works in progress. So never let that thought leave you. It is actually one of my stickies that I have on my desk and just kind of everywhere. So that's one of the other last parting words that I would share.
We will stay here for 5 minutes for an after party to answer any burning questions. And then if you loved it, couldn't get enough of it, want to do more of it, join us for round 2, which will be starting at 3:30. What is time? I forgot what it is anymore. 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Or if you're on the East Coast, join us for dinner. Thank you all for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.